It seems like everywhere you turn these days in the sports world, Morocco is popping up. And it's not just a one-off thing. They're set to host something like over 15 major international sporting events just between this year and next. 15.
It is really remarkable when you think about it. What's really interesting to me is just the sheer variety of events. We're not just talking football here, although the CFF U17 Africa Cup of Nations, that is showcasing some real rising stars in the sport. But then you've got an event like the World Athletics Cross Country Championships. I mean, that's a truly global event. It shows you they're not just focusing on one thing. They've got really broad ambitions.
Yeah, no doubt. And then when you add in the very real possibility of them getting AFCON in 2025, and of course the absolutely massive co-hosting of the FIFA World Cup in 2030 along with Spain and Portugal. By the way, that would be the first time a World Cup has ever spanned two continents. So you've got to ask yourself, how has Morocco managed to become such a magnet for these huge sporting competitions? What's behind this, this sports renaissance, if you want to call it that? And what can we learn from all of this? What can we take away from their approach? That's what we're diving deep into today.
That is the key question, isn't it? I mean, where do you even begin when a country wants to host events on this kind of scale? We dug into a lot of sources, and one thing really stood out. You got to have the infrastructure. That's the foundation.
Makes sense, right. You can't just wake up one morning and say, hey, let's host the World Cup. It takes years of planning and investment. That's clearly what Morocco has been doing. They've been quietly upgrading existing facilities and building these impressive new world-class venues. Like they're playing the long game here.
Oh, absolutely. And we're not even just talking about building fancy stadiums for the big games. Think about places like Mohammed V Stadium in Casablanca, the Adrar Stadium down in Agadir, the Grand Stade de Marrakech. I mean, these are already well-known venues, but they haven't just rested on their laurels. They've been upgrading them to meet the incredibly high standards set by these international federations. Like FIFA, they have specific requirements for everything, the pitch, the lighting, the media facilities. These upgrades aren't just cosmetic, they're very technical.
For sure. And the list goes on, right? You've got the Prince Moulay Abdallah Stadium in Rabat, the Grand Stade de Tenture. Then there are all the improvements that have been made to facilities in places like Fez and Oujda. But what really caught my eye is the plan for this new mega stadium they want to build in Casablanca for the 2030 World Cup. 115,000 capacity. It's a statement.
What I think is really smart is they haven't just focused on these big showpiece stadiums. Our sources really emphasize the investment in youth training centers all over the country. We saw this in the lead up to the CFF U17 Africa Cup of Nations, especially with renovations and expansions, even in some of the smaller cities. It's like they're thinking long term, building a pipeline of young athletes who will be competing in these tournaments in the future.
Yeah, it's like they're building a whole sporting ecosystem, not just focusing on the glamour of hosting a big event, but also on developing the next generation. And it's not just limited to football either. Think about the fact that the Rabat Sports Complex just hosted a leg of the Diamond League, the World Athletics Diamond League. That's attracting the very best track and field athletes in the world to come and compete in Morocco.
Exactly. And to see how broad their thinking is, check out the esports arena they have in Casablanca. You don't see that everywhere. They hosted the Pan Arab Gaming Cup there in 2024 with state-of-the-art VR zones and 5G connectivity. They clearly get that the definition of sport is changing and they want to be at the forefront of that.
So bottom line is, Morocco's rise as a sporting host isn't some happy accident. They've put in the work, made the investment in building this, this really impressive and diverse sporting infrastructure. And they're consistently meeting, often exceeding international standards. This foundation is what allows them to even think about hosting these major events.
Building on that foundation, what's really striking to me is just the wide range of sporting events they're attracting and hosting.
Yeah, they're really running the gamut. While everyone's obviously talking about the AFCON and the World Cup in 2030, it's clear from our research that their commitment goes way beyond football. Just this year alone, in 2024, they've hosted the African Judo Championships, the Moroccan Tennis Grand Prix, and the FIBA African Basketball Tournament. This is a pretty diverse set of sports right there.
And there's a real strategic advantage to not putting all your eggs in one basket, so to speak. By hosting all these different events, you appeal to a much wider range of interests, both domestically and internationally. It probably gives them an edge when they're bidding for future events as well. It shows they have the capacity, the experience to handle just about anything.
And let's not forget the World Athletics Cross Country Championships. That's a huge global event with its own unique challenges. The fact that they pulled that off successfully shows they're capable of handling events outside of the typical stadium sports.
And if you look at it regionally, Morocco is seen as a pretty reliable partner, very neutral. They've stepped up to host qualifier matches for countries that are dealing with conflict, like Libya, Mali, Sudan. That says a lot about their reputation. They're committed to supporting the wider African sporting community.
That's a really good point. It's not just about their own ambitions. And it's not all about modern sports either. They're also promoting traditional sports. Things like the Tbourida, which is a traditional horse riding festival. It's even been recognized by UNESCO. So they're embracing the new while also honoring their heritage.
It makes you think about what defines a nation's sporting identity, right? They're bringing together their traditional sports culture with their ambitions on the global stage. It's a smart approach. It builds national pride and probably makes them more appealing internationally.
So the takeaway here is that it's not just about landing these big events. They're trying to create a whole sporting hub, a place that can host all sorts of competitions, cater to different interests, and even support other countries in the region.
So now let's talk strategy. Because it's clear that this isn't just about nice stadiums and diverse events. They're thinking strategically, especially when it comes to sports diplomacy. Using sport to build relationships internationally, enhance their reputation on the global stage, it's a big part of their plan.
Right. They're making some pretty savvy moves. Hosting these tournaments, working closely with international sports federations. They're positioning themselves as a bridge between Africa, the Arab world, and Europe.
And you can see how that strategy is paying off. The fact they're co-hosting the 2030 World Cup with Spain and Portugal, that's huge. It's not just about football. It shows their growing influence. It's also a historic first, a World Cup spanning 2 continents. It definitely puts them on the map.
And one thing that came up again and again in our research was the driving force behind all of this. King Mohammed VI and what's often called the royal vision. And this isn't a new thing. This has been a focus for him since the early 2000s. That kind of long-term commitment from the top, that's really something.
It does make you realize how important that kind of steady leadership is, doesn't it? When you want to achieve big things. What our sources emphasize is King Mohammed VI's commitment to using sports to, really bring the country together, to drive economic development, to boost Morocco's image in the world. It's about more than just winning.
Okay, so let's break down this royal vision a bit. First, you've got the massive investment in infrastructure, that's obvious. The Royal Initiative for Sports Development, that's not just about those new stadiums in Fez, Tangier, Oujda. It's also about upgrading over 120 local sports centers around the country. And then you've got that, eye-watering 42 billion dirham budget for the 2030 World Cup infrastructure. That's serious money.
It's the scale of it that's impressive, isn't it? It's not just concentrated in a few big cities. They're trying to develop sports infrastructure everywhere, make it accessible to everyone.
Second, the diplomacy. The king has been personally involved in securing these bids, like the AFCON bid, and building those relationships, especially for the 2030 World Cup. When you have the head of state leading the charge like that, it sends a powerful message.
It makes a huge difference, having that kind of backing. When the leader is personally invested, it opens doors that might otherwise be closed.
Third, inclusivity. The idea is that everyone should benefit from these developments. There are programs specifically designed for marginalized communities, girls, young people in rural areas, people with disabilities. And then you have the Sport for All initiative, which is active in something like 400 municipalities. So it's not just about elite athletes.
It shows they're thinking about the social impact of all of this. Building a sports sector that benefits everyone, brings people together, contributes to well-being.
Fourth, sustainability. This is where they get really interesting. They're not just building these huge venues and then forgetting about them. They're making them multi-purpose, incorporating green energy, encouraging communities to use them all year round. It's a more responsible approach compared to places where these expensive stadiums just sit empty after the big event is over.
It fits in with the global trend, doesn't it? Being more environmentally conscious, thinking about the long-term impact of these projects.
And finally, the balance between tradition and innovation. Like we said, they're promoting their heritage sports like the Tbourida Festival, but they're also embracing things like esports with that arena in Casablanca. They're trying to find that sweet spot.
It shows they understand that a country's sporting identity can be both modern and traditional. It's a smart way to connect with more people, both inside Morocco and internationally.
So the big takeaway here is that this didn't just happen overnight. It's a long-term plan. A vision that's been carefully implemented over many years. It's about investment, diplomacy, inclusivity, sustainability. It's a really comprehensive approach.
Now that Morocco is a major player, it's really interesting to compare them to their neighbors. What about other North African countries with strong sporting histories, like Egypt, Algeria, Tunisia? And then you have the Gulf states like Qatar and the UAE with all their investment in sports. How does Morocco stack up?
Yeah, it's a great comparison. What seems to set Morocco apart is this consistent strategic vision. Some other countries in the region have maybe had some instability, politically or economically, which can disrupt those long-term plans. Morocco has been really steady.
It shows how important stability is, right? When you're trying to build something like this, it allows for that long-term thinking.
And it's also interesting to compare them to the Gulf states. Those countries have hosted some massive events, but it often feels more about spectacle. Morocco seems to be more focused on building a base, a foundation, from grassroots development to those top-level facilities. It's less about the one-off mega event and more about creating a lasting structure.
It makes you think about what the goal is, right? Do you want to make a splash with these big events? Or do you want to build something more sustainable? Something that supports both elite athletes and everyday people who just love sports. Morocco seems to be going for the second option.
And what's next? Well, according to our sources, Morocco's already thinking about the future. They want to grow sports tourism using these new facilities and their reputation to attract visitors. They're also committed to building climate-conscious infrastructure and promoting innovation, especially among young people.
They're not slowing down. It's like the 2030 World Cup isn't the end goal. It's just one step on a much longer journey.
So what we've learned is that Morocco has created a pretty unique model for developing sports. They've got a clear long-term plan, they're investing heavily, they're committed to inclusivity, and they're thinking about the future. It's a model that's working. They're not just leading in North Africa, they're becoming a force globally.
So to sum it all up, Morocco's sports renaissance is built on this foundation of great infrastructure, a smart strategy of hosting a diverse range of events, and this long-term vision, this royal vision, which emphasizes diplomacy, inclusivity, sustainability. It sets them apart.
And just to remind everyone, we're talking about over 15 major international sporting events just between 2024 and 2025. AFCON 2025 is coming up soon. And then, of course, the 2030 World Cup. It's an exciting time for sports in Morocco.
This really makes you think, doesn't it? What can other countries learn from Morocco's success? It's about that blend of tradition and innovation, and maybe even more importantly, it's about having a vision and sticking to it. They've shown what's possible when you approach sports strategically, and it makes you wonder, what could sports achieve in other countries? What kind of progress, what kind of collaboration could we see if everyone took this kind of long-term committed approach?